Ready to go. Have a good session.
Thanks. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to this session on designing, implementing, attacking, and defending symmetric crypto. So we will have 6 talks. So we propose that we go, so every speaker has 5 minutes, then we go over the questions for that talk, and then we move on to the next talk and so on. Unless, of course, there is a question that can be, also be asked at the end if needed. Yeah, so if you have questions, please type them in the Zulip chat. So we are going to start with the first talk of this session. It's about the speedy block ciphers. It's from Gregor Leander, Thorben Moos, Amir Moradi, and Shahram Rasoolzadeh. And Thorben will give the talk. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. And welcome to this presentation, short introduction to the speedy family of block ciphers, which is a new family of ultra low latency ciphers that we have built. So in this work, we wanted to revisit a fundamental problem, namely, how do we design a secure encryption algorithm whose hardware implementation is fast? And by hardware implementation, we mean here a circuit representation constructed entirely from CMOS gates. And by fast, we mean the entire time period between providing the input signals to the circuit and receiving the final output signals. That time period should be minimal. So in that regard, we do not include any memory elements to store intermediate results, because this inevitably increases this time period. And therefore, we only consider fully unrolled, so completely combinatorial circuits. What is super high speed encryption needed for? I mean, that depends on your opinion, but in my eyes, the myriad of microarchitectural attacks over the last couple of years has shown us that security architectures of modern central processing units definitely need some improvement, and there are many solutions proposed. One of them is more crypto inside of CPUs, for example, in the sense of secure cache architectures with encrypted addresses, in the sense of memory encryption of like all the storage elements inside of CPUs and surrounding CPUs, then pointer authentication, dedicated hardware instructions, and many more of such features in future generations of high-end CPUs. So let's jump right into the technical stuff. To start off this work, we have been looking at how CMOS gates are built. And static CMOS gates are built from a pull-up network made from PMOS transistors and a pull-down network made from NMOS transistors. And these gates are naturally inverting. And any non-inverting Boolean function requires at least 2 stages of pull-up and pull-down networks. As an example, we have here an NAND 3 gate on the left and an AND 3 gate on the right. And you can see that the AND 3 gate is essentially a NAND 3 gate with an inverted output. So you have these 2 stages of pull-up and pull-down networks. The signal has to propagate through that. So first you need to charge or discharge this intermediate wire, and then you evaluate the inverter on that. So it definitely takes more time. In that regard, the naturally inverting gates are much more reasonable for low latency constructions. Then there is a second physical observation, namely that the on resistance of PMOS transistors is higher than the on resistance of NMOS transistors of the same size, because the mobility of holes as majority carriers is lower than the mobility of electrons. And in that regard, just a switched on PMOS transistor conducts less current than a switched on NMOS transistor. And this is even amplified if you connect PMOS transistors in series. So all the logic gates that require PMOS transistors to be connected in series, to be stacked, they suffer from this effect and have like a lower latency. On the left, you can see a NAND gate again. On the right, a NOR gate. In the NOR gate, you have the PMOS transistors connected in series, which makes it slow. On the left side, you have the PMOS transistors connected in parallel, so you can charge the output much faster. We can also see that when we take a look at the latencies in standard cell libraries. Here we listed them for NAND gate 45 nanometer and NAND gate 50 nanometer. And I've marked the inverter and NAND gates for all types of inputs. So the number of inputs is the fan in here, and the NAND gates and the inverter gates for their number of inputs are always the fastest or among the fastest gates in any technology. If you look here, for example, the NAND 4 is by far the fastest gate for 4 inputs, and it's more than twice as fast as the NOR 4. But we cannot stop at looking at the latency of logic gates. We also need to consider the latency of logic circuits. So here is a very simple example. On the left side, we have a circuit where 2-input XOR drives 8 further 2-input XORs. And some people would say, okay, you have a gate depth of 2 and both are XORs, so the latency should be twice the base latency of an XOR, but that's of course not the case. Because the first stage XOR has to drive such a huge capacitive load to charge all these input pins of the further XORs that its base latency is increased more than 4 times just by its electrical environment. And the second stage XOR is also increased because they are driven by a signal with a large transition time, which also makes the overall switching a little slower. Of course, you can have a drive strength buffer, as you can see on the right side, to make up for that a little bit. Then you can drive the signal faster, but you have increased the gate depths from 2 to 3. And this example is just to show you that neither the gate depths nor like the base latency of the gates are sufficient information to judge the latency of a circuit. You also need to take the topology of the circuit into account. And with this information and a little bit more that's described in more detail in the paper, we have built this 6-bit S-box. So most of the effort of this work was spent on searching this particular S-box. It was not trivial. We have also searched for larger S-boxes and for even faster ones. But this one is a really nice result. It's a 6-bit S-box with full diffusion, a uniformity of 8, a linearity of 24, and it uses inverters and buffers in the first stage in the inputs. They are needed because each input is selected by each coordinate function anyway in a full diffusion S-box. So you have a fan out there that you need to consider and that you need to buffer. And in the second stage and the third stage, this is all just NAND gates of different inputs. So 2-input NANDs, 3-input NANDs, and 4-input NANDs. And that S-box compares very favorably to other cryptographic S-box. Here is a latency comparison averaged over 6 different standard cell libraries. And we can see that the speedy 6-bit S-box really falls into the range of low latency 4-bit S-boxes. Sure, there are some 4-bit S-boxes which are faster than the speedy S-box, but there are also some which are slower. And definitely the speedy 6-bit S-box is much faster than other 5-bit, 6-bit, or 8-bit S-box listed here. The linear layer is mostly this mixed columns plus at round key plus at round constants operation, which is quite heavy because it requires 3 stages of 2-input XORs. But we apply it only after each second S-box stage. And we need a strong linear layer to reduce the number of rounds to a minimum, which is very important for a low latency cipher as well. Here's the whole cipher. So as I said, we have the S-box, then we have shift columns, then the S-box again, shift columns again. Then we have this combined operation of mixed columns at round key at round constant. And that is essentially 1 round. Our security claims for speedy with 5 rounds and 192-bit key and block size are that attacks require a complexity of larger than 2 to the 128 time complexity when the data is limited to 2 to the 64. For speedy 6 and speedy 7, we claim 128 and 192-bit security. So speedy 5 already has a significantly higher security claim than Prince and Prince version 2, which is an updated version of Prince published at SEC 2020. And Speedy 6 and 7 are even in the range of like AES. Here we can see a latency comparison of the full encryption.
Excuse me, can you please wrap up in a minute or so, because we are running a bit over time.
So here we can just see that Speedy 5 and Speedy 6 are faster than all the competition. The area is also not bad if you take into account that's a 192-bit cipher. And in conclusion, Speedy 5 is like 25% faster than Prince. Speedy 6 is even 10 to 12% faster than Prince, and 3 to 7 faster than Ortros. Ortros is a PRF and not invertible. Speedy, on the other hand, is. So we believe that for all applications where encryption speed and security are the primary goals, Speedy is a great choice. Yeah, thank you for your attention. Sorry for taking long, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the talk. So far, we have not got any outside questions on Zulip, so maybe we can go on to the next session. I'm sorry, next talk. And please feel free to post questions, comments on this talk so that we can come back to it in a spare time at the end of session. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. So the next talk is about the area latency symbiosis. The talk is from Fatih Bali, Andrea Caforio, and Subhadip Banik. And Fatih, sorry, will give the talk. So the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I am Fatih Bali, and this is my quick talk for our work, the area latency symbiosis. So right now we are at the final round at NIST LWC, but at the time of writing this paper, we had to look from the second round. And if you go back to the snapshot from the second round, what we see is that there are a number of authenticated encryption candidates that depend on the mode of operation type of design, which means that the efficiency of this authenticated encryption boils down to the choice and the implementation of the block cipher. And in this particular case, you see that the GIFT, Skinny, and the AES block ciphers were quite popular. And namely, you had 11 candidates that were making use of this family of block ciphers. And the motivation in this call is to look back to these block ciphers from the smallest area implementation perspective. So when we talk about the aggressive optimization techniques for the silicon area for these block ciphers, the first paper that comes to mind is from Jean et al. From CHEST 2017, where the authors, for the first time, designed a 1-bit serial architecture for the block ciphers AES, Skinny, and present 80. And that is a particularly challenging task because these block ciphers are designed with 4-bit or 8-bit boundaries in mind, which is just an artifact from the microcontroller implementations. And these implementations are the state-of-the-art smallest implementations so far. And then the second work that is again related is from Banik et al. From FSC 2020, where in the same fashion, the authors tried to implement the present 80 and GIFT 64, again in a 1-bit serial fashion, where in this particular one, the particular challenge comes from the permutation layers of these block ciphers, because they are defined at a 1-bit granularity, which makes them quite hard and difficult to implement through a pipelined architecture. So following the footsteps of this work, we look again to the 1-bit serial implementations, but our idea is to combine the area metric with the latency as well as the energy metrics at the same time. So if you just look back to the implementation, for example, of an AES that is implemented in a 1-bit serial fashion, what you see at the core is what we call the pipeline, which is just 128 flip-flops arranged in a fashion that the bits can be rotated through it. And the main difference between compared to previous work and what we do is in the previous work, what you see is there's a very sequential execution of the layers of a round. So in the case of AES, you have the addition of the key, you have the S boxes, followed by the shift rows, followed by the mixed column, which are organized in a way that you have to first finish the addition of the key and the S box, and only then you execute the shift rows. In comparison, what we do is what I would like to call a continuous execution, where we treat each bit separately, which means that while you have some of the bits which have already completed their mixed columns operation, you might have some other bits which are just going through the S box or the key addition at the same time, which at the end means that you can complete a single round in a much faster fashion. So that would be, for example, in the case of AES, 128 clock cycles. compared to the 160 clock cycles from the previous work. So that is basically faster, has lower latency, which means a better throughput. At the same time, it means that you consume less energy and the power. And this work is also extended to one candidate for each of the block cipher from the NIST LWC, just to show that you can also extend this idea to the mode of operation layer as well. So just to wrap it up, in this paper, what we present is a technique which can do execute the rounds of AES, skinny, and GIFT 128 in a continuous fashion. So the main benefit is that we don't have to freeze pipeline, we don't have to deal with synchronization problems that previous implementations suffer, which means that you can avoid something like a clock gating, which is something that is not liked very much during the synthesis process, as well as you can avoid enabled flip-flops which are larger in nature. It also achieves the minimum latency that you can expect from one serial implementation. And also it follows the standard ordering, so you can just use them in a plug and play fashion. And the source code of these implementations are also available as a chess artifact. And that is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Thank you for the talk.
Thanks.
Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't got any comment yet. So yeah, let's move on to the next talk.
Okay.
Okay, I start sharing.
Okay, yes. Let me just introduce you. So the next talk is about breaking mask implementations by Olivier Bronchin and François-Xavier Standard. And Olivier, yes, you can go ahead. Thanks.
Okay, do you see my slides correctly?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the paper is about running worst case evaluation on mask software. And by what's the goal of worst case evaluation? Basically, is that when you have a product, a secure implementation, you want to evaluate the security. So how do you do that? First, you run some attacks, some state-of-the-art attacks, so SOTA. And these attacks improve with time. So the data complexity of the best possible attack, of the best known attack decreases with time. But at some point you have to deploy your product in the wild. And so that's what's with the green line. And this attack still improves this time after you have released your product. So the question is, what security level should you consider? The goal of worst case attack is really to anticipate improvement of future attacks by saying no adversary will be able to do better than this. What's the ingredients to reach that? Basically, we give full power to the evaluator during the profiling. So evaluator has to know all the source code. He has to know all the randomness used during profiling, all the randomness used. He also has to have very nice setup. He can optimize that, have it with a low noise. And then he has to have some techniques to exploit all the possible information that's within the leakages. The main ingredient really is the knowledge of the randomness, because it allows to have a simpler profiling, and it allows to give interpretation of the results. And based on that, we are able to give clear guidelines to evaluator about why an implementation is weak or why is it strong. Of course, there is some gap between the security level that you have when you deploy the product and the worst case attack complexity that you evaluate. So in the short term, there is probably a gap, but in the long term, we expect that this gap vanishes because best attacks improves and maybe reach the worst case attacks complexity. So what's in the paper? Basically, we have a methodology to evaluate mass bit/slash implementation, which relies on some old-fashioned tools that are Gaussian templates, dimensionality reduction, and some Saska with dedicated factor graph. We apply that to AES and Clyde, which is lightweight block cipher. And we use that for the traces of on the traces of the chess 2020 CTF. The targets, the traces are recorded on Cortex-M0 and Cortex-M3. We extrapolate the security of this implementation to larger masking order. That's in the full paper or in the full talk. And we also discuss the impact of additional countermeasures. So just one slide about the methodology. Basically, it consists on observing leakage on all the shares. So A1 and A0, B0, B1 are all shares. And we will combine with Saska the value for B, which is the shared value, C and A. That's done with what we call encoding graphs. Yeah. And then with unmasked graph, we link all these secret variables, so A, B, and C, with the operation, which is a multiplication here. So what are the pros and cons of this methodology? Basically, the effort was made to have all the complexities scaling gently with D, and also to save some memory and runtime. The drawback is that we cannot exploit lower order flows with this methodology. All the methodology was implemented with Scalib, which is a Python toolbox that we developed for that. Thanks to Gaëtan Cassirs, who helped really to develop these tools. And it's really optimized to run on a single core, and there is a Rust backing, so good performances. About the evaluation, so first, on the graph there, on the x-axis, you have the data complexity evaluated with our methodology, and on the y-axis there, you have the medium key rank. And what we see, of course, is as the number of traces of the observed by the adversary increases, the number of the key rank decreases. So first of Cortex M0, when AES is running, we see that we just need 9 traces to break a 6-share implementation. And if the same code is running on Cortex M3, then we need more traces. So 2000 traces, we are able to break 5 shares implementation. So it means that Cortex M3 is more noisy than Cortex M0, and so the attacks are more complex. We also observed that Clyde, which is also running on Cortex M0, has better security than AES. So it means that because it's lightweight, it's easier to protect. And we also provide, as I said previously, extrapolation to larger security order and other interpretation in the paper. So as a conclusion, I would say that the paper contains an efficient methodology to either attack or evaluate mask implementation. There is for sure a lack of noise in low-cost MCU. We investigated, so that's an issue. And how do you protect this kind of device? It's, for me, really a hard question that has to be answered. Not sure there is the clear answer. Also, because there is a low noise there, we need to have masking at higher order on these devices. And a toolbox that is optimized for sidechain analysis. So thanks. Here are some useful links to reproduce the attacks for Scalib, and also we release the paper that is give me 5 minutes, and which is applying the methodology to the well-known ASCAD dataset. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much for the talk. We've got one question from Fatih. So I'm reading it. I was wondering if the collected power samples have to deal with jittering. If not, how problematic would it be to deal with synchronization among power traces from the attacker's perspective?
Okay, so as I said, I think in one of the first slides, we really have, for evaluation, we would like that the evaluator is in the best case for him. So it means that he can tune the measurement setup so that there is no jitter. So in practice, on the MCU, we use the crystal to derive the clock. I think that if this is not possible, probably that you could use realignment process for that. But I'm not sure that relying on jitter is a good security not sure that at least when you can put a crystal, I'm not sure jitter provides meaningful security.
Okay, thank you. And we've got another one to Olivier. What is the reason that more trace is required to attack Clyde compared to AES on Cortex M0? Is this really due to the more compact nature, fewer instructions, or maybe related to more randomness used within the circuit?
So there is two things. First, there is less computation involved in Clyde, so there is less points where there is some leakages. I mean, the traces are shorter, so less information is available. And then also, Clyde is designed to be bit sliced on 32-bit, while AES is not. And to have efficient bit slice implementation of AES, you have to bit slice on 16-bit. And you can, I mean, there is on the GoodRZ and Riva implementation we investigated. There is some shift where you put data on some of the 32 bits and you use the 16 remaining bits to do other things. And I think this is one of the big issue with this AES implementation. So there is really a lot of details in the paper. So I think if this is interesting for you, this is I mean, where you should have a look.
Thank you very much. I think we should move on to the next talk.
Okay, I stop
The
sharing.
last question is from Mark, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for the talk. So the next talk is about high order lookup tables. And the paper is from Annapurna Valivetti and Srinivas Vivek. And Annapurna will give the talk. So the floor is yours.
I'll start with the screen sharing.
Yes.
Is it visible? Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah, can you make it full screen mode?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Annapurna Valivetti from Triple Bangalore, India. I'll be presenting our work titled Higher Order Lookup Table Masking in Essentially Constant Memory. From past 4 days, it's the terms like side channel attack and masking are very known to everyone. I'll start directly with our problem statement. The goal of our work is to optimize the memory required for a higher order lookup table scheme. So if we look at the current state of the art of higher order lookup table schemes, for a k prime S box, we need the memory of 2 power k times the number of shares n, and each entry of the table will be of k prime bits. So this is the memory required for a single lookup table of S box, and the memory required is almost similar, which is of in the quadratic in terms of the number of shares. And if we instantiate this higher order lookup table scheme for a 10th order secure implementation with full pre-processing, what I mean to say by full pre-processing is we'll make the lookup tables ready for the final lookup. There will be some pre-computation required for the lookup tables before the final lookup. We'll pre-compute that lookup tables independent of the secret. And if at all that pre-processing is, we want to go for a pre-processing approach, we need a memory of 440 kilobytes per AES 128 implementation. So this memory may be heavy for a resource constraint, especially the memory constraint devices. So how can we optimize the memory required? So that is the goal of our work. There are two possibilities to reduce the memory required. Either we can reduce the number of rows, we can compress the number of rows to per k rows, or we can go for a compression across the columns. We can reduce the number of columns. The first approach of reducing the number of rows we explored in the previous chess 2020. So there we opted for a second order compression, but still the higher order compression is an open problem. We are not the extension of the second order to higher orders is still an open problem. So in this work, we opted for reducing the number of columns. So essentially the ideas behind our work to reduce the number of columns is nothing but we want to we would like to store only the first column of the lookup table, so that the remaining n-1 columns will not be storing them. So how we can really achieve security without storing the n-1 columns is that if you observe the lookup table compression scheme from Eurocrypt 14, the n-1 columns are nothing but random values. Each S box will be shifted by the secret share, and it will be protected with the remaining n-1 random masks. So the remaining n-1 columns are to store the random masks. So if we can somehow avoid storing the n-1 columns, what we opted is we will be going for a pseudo-random generator. So since it's a deterministic construction, we can call the pseudo-random generator whenever we want to compute the output masks. So that is the idea. So that essentially we'll be computing the masks on the fly whenever we want to protect the shift, and we'll be discarding the random masks, and whenever we want, we'll be recomputing them. So as I mentioned, there is a recomputation step involved. This will be the additional overhead compared to the Eurocrypt 14 scheme. We need to recompute the remaining n-1 columns of the lookup table. And we want to, if you look at our full version of the paper, you can see how we can better optimize this overhead. And when it comes, since we want to compute the random mask using a PRG construction, the PRG construction also should be probing secure. The adversary can also look into the intermediates of the PRG. So we want the PRG construction to be probing secure. And there are two choices from the state of the art. One is a robust PRG construction proposed by Isha et al. And the other one is proposed in Karun and others in Eurocrypt 20. So because we want to optimize the memory, we want the input seed to the random PRG as minimum as possible. So that depends on, there is a locality which is nothing but which decides how many random bits we need for the PRG. So the locality, if you can improve the locality of the scheme, that essentially will optimize the PRG seed as well. So these are the ideas, high-level ideas of our scheme. And if I compare it, essentially the Eurocrypt scheme versus ours, you can clearly see that we have only one column in the lookup table, whereas the other scheme has n columns. And the PRG will generate the random mask required for this. And we also have additional advantages using LR, not only the locality of the circuit, it also have other advantages. You can look for the full version of our paper to find out the additional advantages. And this part will be pre-processing to achieve better online execution time. So the online execution time will have a lookup. As I mentioned, the overhead of computing the n-1 random masks. It's a decomputation step also involved before the lookup. So this is the high-level view of our scheme. And if I just want to touch upon the robust PRG and the multi-PRG techniques at a very high level. The robust PRG technique will look at the complete implementation as a single large circuit, and we'll be computing the locality with respect to this circuit. We prove the constructions using the TSNA security, compositional security notation. When it comes to the multi-PRG, we'll be dividing the randomness required as subsets. So each column will be treated as a subset, and we'll be using a PRG per subset. So it can be viewed as the robust PRG as a single large circuit, whereas the multi-PRG will have a dedicated PRG per column. And we assume the worst case scenario of, since we are not the multi-PRG constructions, since the PRGs are not robust, we assume the worst case scenario of the adversary can possibly give the adversary the whole column, the whole randomness subset to the adversary. So that is why we prove these constructions in the extended security model, TSNA R star. And if I compare the asymptotics of our schemes, the two schemes, we have only 2 power k times k prime, which is to store the first column of the lookup table. And this is to store the input random seed for the robust and multi-PRG constructions. And it has the time per PRG depend upon the seed it will decide. We use the polynomial based PRG construction. So the time required for PRG will depend upon the inputs to the polynomial PRG construction. And finally, the results, this is for a multi-PRG construction of AES 128. We explore the orders of n is equal to 3 to 11, which is the security of 10th order of security. we essentially require 42 KB of memory to store the pre-processed tables. And you can see that the online execution time is essentially 4 million clock cycles. We offloaded the heavy part of the computation to the pre-processed phase, and the online computation is 4 million clock cycles. And I would like to conclude we experimented till 10th order. So it requires approximately 40 KB to store the pre-processed tables plus the random seed input. And we also, this is another interesting feature. We explored the RNGA versus PRG speed off. Inbuilt, the lookup table based schemes have a pre-processing phase. So we can try the random number generator PRG for offline and a faster TRNG. If at all the device has a faster TRNG, we can also try the trade-offs to achieve a better online execution time. And we compare our results with the bit sliced AES. We are 1.5 times faster than the 8-bit bit sliced, and we are almost comparable to a 32-bit bit sliced implementation. So that may be the possible future work we would like to explore. And thank you for the artifact initiative in Chess 2021. We have our code there in the artifact and also our GitHub page. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Although we've got one question from Amir, but I think we are running out of time, so I think it's better we move on.
Yeah,
to the next one.
I'll answer the question on Julep.
Yeah, please continue the discussion in Julep.
Okay, thank you. So the next talk is about low latency Keccak at any arbitrary order. The paper is from Sarah Zahai, Ain Razai Shahmir Zadi, Ahmi Soleimani, Razai Salifard, and Amir Moradi. And Sarah will give the talk, so the floor is yours.
Do you have my screens now?
Yes, we see it perfectly, thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction. Hello everybody, I'm Sarah Zari and I have the pleasure of presenting our joint work with Ain Razai Shahmirzadeh, Hadi Soleimani, Razia Salifard, and Amir Moradi. Our paper is entitled Low Latency Keccak at Any Arbitrary Order. This side-channel immune realization of Keccak that we have proposed in our paper can be well introduced by its three key properties. It's low latency, compact, and extendable to any desired security order. Respectively, it's low latency since we have designed it with only one register stage per round. It's compact compared to its competitors from the state of the art due to using D+1 masking instead of TT+1. And finally, with regard to the straightforward algorithm that we have provided for it, it can be implemented in any arbitrary security order while preserving its outstanding properties. In the rest of my talk, first I will explain our motivation for proposing such a realization, and then I will go through the details of our design and its evaluation results, of course, all in brief. Here we have a puzzle-like view of the most significant mass implementations of Keccak, in which I have divided the existing designs into three groups. First, higher order implementations and the low latency ones. This kind of categorization, although can be a bit inaccurate since being low latency can be counted as a property of any first or high order implementation, but I have separated these kind of designs into their own individual group just to investigate and study them more closely. So this map does not imply that the mass implementations of Keccak are either first or high order or they are low latency. In fact, the third column tries to pick out the low latency cases of the first two, of course, if there are any. And as we can see here, amongst the previously proposed designs, there has only been one design that aims to be low latency. This implementation employs the Untitled architecture, which necessitates doubling the security order at the start of its implementation due to maintaining the completeness feature of its TD+1 masking underlying masking scheme. This duplication, when considering the high order implementations, results in a significant number of input shares. And as we have investigated in our paper, unfortunately, there do not exist any efficient or affordable realizations for the quadratic five-bit permutation of Keccak when we want to extend this low latency implementation to second or higher order implementation. And this is our strong motivation for proposing a low latency realization that can be practically extended to any arbitrary order. And to this end, we switch the underlying masking scheme of the Keccak implementation to D+1, and then try to stay with the latency of an unprotected implementation, which is 1 register per run. And let's have a look at how we did it. We got the drawn function of the original D+1 mask implementation of Keccak and moved the compression layer to after the theta operation. This relocation allowed us to remove the register stage subsequent to the chi operation. And in this revised round function, we need the power of 2 instances of theta. But the more important challenge is the non-completeness failure that happens as the result of the subsequent applications of theta and chi operations without any in-between registers. In fact, although theta is a linear function, but its design is in such a way that it puts more than one share of each input variable in an output share, and hence it falsifies the non-completeness when we consider the deprobing model. Our solution for this issue is developed based on a realignment of the component functions that are produced and aligned in the chi function according to the D+1 masking scheme. In fact, we have proposed an algorithm that can straightforwardly explain how this alignment can be applied to in any arbitrary order. And this is the final version of our round function, which makes use of another multiplexer identified as max2 to take the outputs of the last round directly from the compression layer, which turns their number to back to D+1. We have reported the results of the performance of our design from its first to fifth order secure implementations, which show that compared to the other proposed first order low latency design, ours achieves around 74% lesser area consumption with almost the same delays, and compared to the original D+1 mask implementations, ours has about 26 and 31% lesser delays at its first and second orders, respectively. We have also performed some experimental analysis, including a fixed with random t-test using 100 million traces. I have put the results of the first order test here, and the results for the second and the third test can also be found in our paper. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. We haven't got any question yet, so yeah, let's move on to the next talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, thank you very much. So the last talk of this session is about revealing the weakness of addition chains. The paper is by Jingjiang Ming, Huizhong Li, Yongbing Zhu, Wei Cheng, Ziwa Qiu, and Jingjiang will give the talk. So the floor is yours.
Is my slides good?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thanks for the
Thanks.
introduction. And hello, everyone. I will present our work. To achieve masking, S-box can be expressed as a sequence of squares and multiplications. And these multiplications can be then implemented using the non-scheme such as SW. And here is one example for the AES S-box. And it is called the addition chain based mask implementation because the exponents are added. And actually, it is one of the most popular addition chain for AES S-box. It is used in lots of masking schemes such as Boolean masking, the multiplicative masking, the inner product masking. However, the addition chain induces lots of computations for monomials, and nearly half monomials over the finite field are not balanced functions. So a natural question is, what if the computations of some intermediate monomials leak more? To solve the problem, we first review DPA, which is a classic side channel analysis. In DPA, the leakage traces are divided into two groups based on the J speed of the S-box output. And then their differential expectation is a distinguished value. But if the S-box is replaced by an unbalanced function f, the J speed of f may be always 0 or 1, and the leakage cannot be divided into two groups. In this case, we set the distinguished value delta to 0, and then we calculate the average of the distinguished values for all bits of the key hypothesis under a Hamming weight model. We then define the polygon degree, which is called PD for short, as the difference between the distinguished value for the correct key and those for other key hypotheses. Then we have that the smaller PD of a function is, the stronger it resists against side channel attacks because the distinguished value is lower. And moreover, we have that the PD is also valid for the attacks against masked implementation because the expectation of the combined leakage follows a linear transformation of a Hamming weight distribution. We verify the sumness of PD in simulation in 4-bit case. If we classify the monomials by PD values, we can see that the CPA results match the PD values well. And in 6-bit case, PD also works well. Then we apply PD for addition chain implementation. We instantiate two adversaries. The first adversary is only able to find the leakage corresponding to one sensitive intermediate, then let attacks. And the second adversary is able to land side channel attacks on all sensitive intermediates, and then sum the results together to achieve a higher success rate. Then we found 3 typical addition chains with 4 multiplications and 7 squares. The first one is the weakest for both two adversaries, and the second one is the strongest. The third one is also very strong and can be performed in parallel. Here is our experiment setup. The power trace and EM trace are collected respectively. Note that the noise level for the monomials are different, and the difference gets more obvious for EM traces. This difference will also affect the attack results. And here is the practical results of the number of required traces to reach a guessing entropy lower than 10. We can see that the 2 strong addition chains is better than the other 2. And in the worst case, its resistance is close to that of unprotected lookup table-based implementation. At last, we summarize our work briefly. We target the addition chain implementation with Boolean masking. Then we use PD to qualify the resistance and valid using the higher order CPA. We also try the mutual information as a metric and the valid using template attack and the deep learning based attack. Please refer to our paper for their results if you are interested. However, besides the addition chain, there might be other implementations, including unbalanced functions. And the unbalanced functions might be also affect the security of other masking schemes. Then we may need other metrics to qualify the resistance and validate them with other distinguishers. Thanks for listening my presentation.
Thank you. We've got one question from Eugen.
Oh.
And yeah, since we are running out of time, so I get just a part of it. So what happens if you change the primitive polynomial?
I'm sorry. We don't try other primitive monomial. We just try the simulated attacks on the monomials on the popular polynomials.
Okay, so yeah, you can put some comments on the property regarding primitive polynomial. So yeah, please continue the discussion at Zulip.
Okay, so I think this ends the session. Thank you very much to all the participants, and in particular to all the speakers.